welcome to Continuing the Conversation, where we like to connect Sunday to Monday. In other words, we like to take some of what you heard on Sunday and connect it to your everyday life on Monday. I'm Clay Smith, and I haven't had the chance to meet you, and I have some great guys around the table today, but I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. So, who are you?
I'm Adrian Coetzer. I get to be the executive pastor here for disciple making specifically, and basically just help coordinate our ministries to aim at disciple making.
I'm David Anderson. I'm our men's pastor and also part of the 419 team.
So two of the incredible team that we have here at Johnson Ferry, and really appreciate you guys being here. Look forward to having this conversation. Now, this past Sunday, I spoke to our church about our one thing, and I talked about how our one thing in 2024, and hopefully beyond, is that we would become a disciple-making culture here at Johnson Ferry. And I unpacked some of the reasons why that was really important to me. Some of those were things like, first of all, Jesus did that, so
That's a good reason.
that's always a good reason if Jesus does it. Number two, my own growth in my life has often been accelerated through either being discipled or discipling others, so I've seen that. Third, I talked about how just coming off of COVID, we had to make some shifts during COVID, and we were much more relational. We were doing things like homes in people's neighborhoods, community Bible studies. We were out there in the neighborhoods, and as normalcy has come back, some of our old patterns have come back, and we might have lost some of that missional zeal that we had. And then maybe the last reason for me was just as I've traveled around the world, like you guys have as well, you see that expressions of church are very different than here in America. And I would say that often what we see across the pond is more biblical in some ways than what you see here in America. So for those reasons, many more, we have felt led to say, let's do what we can to build a disciple-making culture here at Johnson Ferry. So let's just start out with some basic terms. I think that's really important. And this last Sunday, we gave a definition of a disciple, and I'm going to just read it so I make sure I get it right. And there's no perfect definition, but I want to hear you guys talk about this definition. And this is the definition that we said. We said a disciple is one who has found Jesus, is following the ways of Jesus, and is leading others to do the same. So those are intentional words. And maybe, Adrian, to start with you, to talk about that definition and what it means and why those words were chosen.
Yeah, so first of all, that definition, as we articulated it, is based on Matthew 4:19, loosely, when Jesus says, "Come and follow me, and I will make you disciples of men." And, those three components are really important, but it's always important to step one step back, to just remember that the reason we do it is because Jesus is worth it. If we say it's about following Jesus because Jesus is worth following, making Jesus known because Jesus is worth knowing, and then making known likewise. So it has to begin with why Jesus. And then the three components, it's just basically this, is obedience, is Jesus is so compelling that I want to follow him. I am changed, I'm transformed by an encounter with Christ, the work of the Holy Spirit. And then as he works in me, as he transforms me, I follow him and I grow in him. And part of that growth, a natural result of that growth, is that I cannot help but talk about him. And that's really one way to sum up that definition.
So it's based on Matthew 4:19. And David, I know that one thing that has been very important to us is that whatever we mean by discipleship or disciple making, it's not only an insider movement.
That's right. Yeah.
So how does that definition connect what we're trying to do not only with other believers but also with non-believers?
Yeah, this is a lifestyle. This is not something that we come into the church building to do. This is something that we prepare to go out and do amongst the people that God has placed around us. So it's a lifestyle. So if you go back to Matthew 4:19, when Jesus says, "I'm going to make you fishers of men," he's talking to fishers of fish. Yeah. Right? Their whole life, their whole community's life was revolved around fishing. It was the center of their life. It was their lifestyle, was fishing. And he's saying, "I'm going to make you fishers of men. I'm going to change the center of your life. I'm going to change the purpose of your life. And I want you to wrap everything around becoming a fisher of men." And so that's what it's about. It's about making it part of our lifestyle and us going out where God has placed us and taking the gospel to those people.
When Jesus gave the Great Commission, I think about that scene it's in all four Gospels, but in Matthew 28 is where we typically say is the Great Commission. Yeah. And Jesus there is on the mountain with his now 11 disciples, because Judas obviously proved not to be genuine, and they hadn't yet chosen. Do you know who the one they chose was? Anybody know? Matthias. See, these are Bible guys. These are experts. These are masters of divinity. Anyways, so they got 11 disciples, and Jesus says, all authority in heaven and earth is given to me. Go and make disciples of the nations, baptize in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I'll be with you to the end of the age. I don't think he meant, all right, now, Andrew, you get with Peter and y'all meet for a while, and then John and James. I mean, the assumption was, you guys have followed me,
That's right.
and I want you to now go to other places with people who aren't following me and help them to do that.
That's right.
And the reason I keep coming back to that is because as a pastor, I've often equated or seen discipleship equated with what Christians do with other Christians.
Yeah. Programming.
And we mean something different than that. So maybe back up a little bit. We talk about wanting to create a disciple-making culture. First of all, what is a culture? I know, Adrian, you have some good thoughts on just culture in general. How do you know if something is the culture of something?
Culture is basically those basic defining elements of who we are, what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. And often culture will show up in our language and what we talk about it and how we want to talk about it, the kind of language we're going to use. For instance, we intentionally use the word disciple making instead of discipleship.
That's right.
To re-articulate that active role of disciple making, of going and doing this. So it's our language. It's also what we invest our time in, we invest our resources in. What is important to us? If you love fishing, like we are all. We love to fish, all three of us. We're going to invest in our fishing gear and time and energy to go do that. Yeah. And then it's what we celebrate, it's those things that really we want to make a monument out of, those things we want to make a big deal out of. Mm-hmm. That's really ultimately what culture is. So as we think about a disciple-making culture, is us as a church, as a people of God, what are we talking about? What are we making a big deal out of? And what are we willing to pour all of our being into to make a big deal out of? Yeah. And if you look at what we do currently, what we want to do, where we're headed, it's really exciting to see the journey God has us on as a church to do exactly that.
Yeah. And I would say that this is not some class that you can just show up for and just hear the content and say that was really good content and kind of go about your life. This is something that you're going to have to develop a pioneering spirit to really take this out into your life, and you're going to have to contextualize everything that we talk about into your real life and think about how you're supposed to engage your people, the people that God's placed in your life. And so I think that's a really interesting aspect of this, because we can't give you steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We give you step 1, and then we ask you to prayerfully enter into this pioneering endeavor of discipling in your own life, whether it's in your home with your own kids, your neighbors, your co-workers, whoever it is that God puts on your heart. And I just imagine that when we start to hear all the stories of people making disciples, that they're all going to be very varied in how they happened, and almost undeniable that God was the one that was creating those moments in those different situations. So I think that's the exciting part of disciple making.
I talked earlier about the mission field, how that's been so formative for me. I know you guys as well, just in terms of what we're watching and seeing in terms of God's activity. And let's be honest, in a lot of missional contexts, you can't get a big building and pack hundreds or thousands of people in them. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Often because it's either unaffordable or it's illegal, and so you have to do it in a much more secretive way. Now, in America, for the most part, we can have buildings. We have a very nice big building here, and this is not to say that buildings are bad. That's right. But let's be honest, a lot of American Christians have gotten attached to this idea that everything within the church walls is what counts as mission. Mm-hmm. And what we're trying to say is we're trying to get people out of the church, into their neighborhoods, into their workplaces, into their gyms, into their kids' ball teams, and to see that as the primary, not the only, but the primary place of ministry. Sure. So maybe just practically speaking, if in a few years' time, because I don't think this happens in 12 months, but if in a few years' time, Johnson Ferry had a disciple-making culture, what are some of the things you think that we would see, hear, celebrate, talk about, just paint a picture maybe of some of those things.
Yeah, I think one thing would be helpful along those lines is to just remember that whether we realize or not, we're already all disciple makers of something. We are people who are about something. Mm-hmm. And when we're talking about it, it's not just going into the community for going to the community's sake. We're not just talking about making Johnson Ferry known. That's not the point. The point is to make Jesus known.
That's right.
And so, the kind of culture that is a Christ-centered, disciple-making culture that makes much of Jesus here and there is the kind of culture where we probably would see things celebrated like more and more people of all ages, of all generations, intentionally stepping into their daily life and telling stories of how God is using them to touch lives, who touch lives, who touch lives. The stories of transformation, the stories of people who do bold things, who do beautiful things, who do deep things, and often at the great cost, like you mentioned earlier.
That's right. Well, and even to have those opportunities to tell the stories, you have to spend the time with people outside the church and form relationships with people outside the church. We create great environments here in the church building for relationships to happen. Yeah. But to export that to how do you create great relationships with your neighbors, with people that you do common hobbies with, people that you go to work with every single day, and to use those opportunities to prayerfully enter into those relationships. And those aren't projects. Mm-hmm. Those are people to have genuine relationships with them, to really care about them, and to want them to be a part of your life, and to want to be a part of their life, and then to bring those stories into that and say, if you like this story, I'd love to share more with you about these stories of Jesus that I think could be really beneficial to your life.
Yeah. One of the key words we maybe just be talking about here is just intentionality. Yeah. About our relationships, our time. Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine too, in addition to what you guys said, parents really getting a hold of their role within their kids' lives. And not just parents generally, but specifically dads. Yeah. Yeah. That's not to say we have some great dads here at Johnson Ferry that love Jesus and do this well, but a lot of dads have priorities in other places right now than discipling their kids or their grandkids. And that's part of also what we want to see captured in this movement of disciple making, just the place of home and shaping lives that look like Jesus.
That's a great place to start. Your kids are pretty forgiving. They'll let you come back the next time and have
pretty forgiving. Completely
depends on how old they are.
That's right.
But I think they're great to just sit down and say, guys, I'm trying to figure out this myself, how to lead others spiritually. Yeah. And I think they would enjoy the experience of watching you grow in that as a disciple maker.
Well, one thing we're going to talk about this series is some of those ways that you can help shape others into the mold of Jesus and yourself. And we'll talk about these throughout the series, but things like worship, community, service, generosity, multiplication, all these concepts are really important. But let me ask a question that talks to our community in the context here. We live in a very performance-oriented, ambitious culture in East Cobb and in Atlanta generally. And there's a lot about that I really respect and like and find myself fitting into. But sometimes that's not very helpful when it comes to both being a disciple and a disciple maker. Yeah. Could you guys speak into that and maybe just confront a little bit of the elephant in the room in terms of how we tend to think about disciple making and some of the challenges?
You think about our day-to-day, right? How many of us have checklists of sorts? We have to-do lists. We have things that we have to go do and execute, things we have to complete. And we're just loving it on our checklist. We go to the restaurant and we have these menus of things and we just pick what we want. We have our televisions, right? We just pick one of the 2 million channels and that's what we want. Yeah. And it's all about what gives me happiness, what gives me joy or pleasure. And usually it's kind of empty, if we're honest. Yeah. But discipleship, this idea of sitting in the presence of God and beginning by just that abiding factor, that just being completely satisfied by God and what He brings to you, is the heart of this. It's truly the heartbeat. Jesus said that people will know His disciples by how we love one another. But that only works if we love Him and if we understand His love for us. And so really, truly, disciple making is being before doing. The doing will always flow out of the being every single time.
Good. Yeah, I think even just the spending time with the Lord to recognize who you are as a child of God, that takes time. And there's the tyranny of the urgent that's calling you to your day every time you sit down in the morning. It's like, praying and everything, you feel the pull of that. And that pull and that urgency and all of that just kind of does violence to us in a way where we just can't relationally connect with the Lord, but it also affects how we relationally connect with other people.
Yeah.
And so to connect with other people relationally in a way that's going to be effective from a disciple-making perspective, it's going to take time.
Yeah.
You're going to have to make changes to your life to create time and space for people, whether they're in your home or outside your home. And we just don't have a lot of margin for that.
Yeah.
Most of us.
And in our culture too, especially in a performance-driven culture, there's something brutal and violent, like you said, of just being humbled to realize that if I'm leading someone else to walk in the ways of Jesus, it also means that I am still growing in the ways of Jesus.
Yeah,
And that humility of just being reminded that I still have some growing to do.
That's right.
Does not come naturally to us.
Yeah.
But it's so powerful.
Yeah, I think it's powerful when we say, I haven't arrived, come grow with me.
Yeah.
Just invite them into this kind of process that you're on.
Yeah.
I think that's powerful.
And abiding in Jesus, as we talked about Sunday, just abiding in Him as the vine, Him as the source of life. Well, this is the beginning of a journey that will for sure go beyond 2024, but the heartbeat of our church this year is really thinking and praying about becoming a culture of disciple making. And so I hope that you'll think and pray about your next step in terms of not only being a disciple, but also learning to be a disciple maker for Jesus. And I hope these conversations are going to be helpful to you, so please keep checking in here. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and all the other ways to plug into Johnson Ferry and continue this conversation with us. But until then, so grateful that you tuned in. Adrian, David, thanks for being on today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And let's keep making disciples.
Yeah.